Hey, greetings. My name is Gray Andrus, and welcome to part three, the third and final part of developmentally informed trauma-aware crisis intervention. And today we're going to talk about support. So if you missed, the first was looking at our foundation. Who are we? What does it mean to be trauma informed? Part two was looking at the definitions and the formation of crisis and its purpose. And then this third and final section is looking at support. So let's do a little rewind here. Number one, what am I feeling now? When you step into a crisis, everybody that's with you at that moment becomes the client. So how is your client? How's the resident feeling, needing, or wanting? How are you feeling? Number one. Number three, how's the environment affecting the situation? And number four, how do I best respond? So here's the stress model cycle that we talked about last time. The pre-crisis state, which there's a trigger, which leads to agitation. There's an escalation, which then can be further escalated to the outburst phase. So anytime we find ourselves with a client in one of these stress models and we can see them triggering, the question is, can we create a detour? You know, you're driving down the road, there's a sign that says the right lane's closed, you got to stop here, you got to turn right to go around, it's a detour. Can we create detours with our clients when they're triggered to prevent them from escalating? Can we create a detour once a client has been escalated to prevent the outburst phase? What can we do to get them back to recovery phase? And what can we do to make them worse? Which is why we always start with, how am I feeling, right? How am I feeling? So here's an example from shelter that I wanted to share with you. The police had contacted shelter and were worried that a client there in Orange was suicidal and maybe had a gun on shelter property. Clinician Purple and myself, I'm clinician Black there, we let the police in. There were 3 police. And so at that moment, as we're working through this situation, the client in orange, the clinician in purple, and the 3 officers are all my client. So how am I feeling? What's my body language saying? What is my nonverbal saying? Where am I standing in relationship to the crisis? And then everybody there becomes my client. My primary client is the resident in orange, but then the other clinician is my client. I got to read what they're doing. I got to look at the 3 officers. And in this crisis, the first blue officer had their thumbs in their police vest and they were leaning against the wall in a pretty relaxed pose. Officer in red had their arm on the orange railing like this. So they were pretty relaxed. The third officer in blue was in a go-to protective stance. So the first 2 who were doing most of the talking to the client in orange were really having very good nonverbals, where the third officer was in a protective stance. So we have to think about how the environment is contributing, and we have to then help everybody either detour out of a triggering phase or an escalation phase and get to recovery as best as we can. After the situation was over, thank the officers, they left, asked the client in orange if they wanted to process. They said no, they just wanted to warm up their pizza. I'm going to respect that. I said to the client, you were so brave in sharing your triggers with the officers. I really respect that. And then process with the clinician in purple. Process, make sure that they were okay at that point. So once we start with, how am I feeling? How's my client or clients feeling? How's the environment contributing to? And then what do I do next? Well, here are some techniques. In the second video, we looked at verbal techniques. This time we're looking at behavioral supportive techniques. Number 1, manage the environment. If I was in a classroom and somebody was melting down, I could try to remove them, or I can remove everybody else, right? I can protect the environment. Listen and validate feelings, genuine empathy. We covered that in section 2. Gentle reminders, I could remind people. A gentle reminder, here's an example. Hey, everybody, dinner's going to start in 15 minutes. So think about, getting your schoolwork put away and getting ready for lunch. A caring gesture is not positive reinforcement. It is a gesture that shows that you care. So when we de-escalated with the client in orange in that previous example she shared, I really feel like you all are caring. And it wasn't that I said she was a great rock star superstar. I just offered, do you want to process? And she said no. But it was that offerance that showed that we cared. Hurdle help is joining a client and solving a problem. So if a client had a messy room, I might say, hey, I'll help. And I would pick up one or two pieces of clothing, but then the rest they do on their own. I'm going to step in and kind of help lead by example. Proximity, time and space. Sometimes in a crisis, backing off and giving the client space. Still staying within eye shot so that way you can manage the environment and protect. But sometimes walking away and using distance is a really great factor. For sure, confrontive front door statements are empathetic pleas. Betsy, please don't do that. Those are not going to work. Those are not going to work. They're not going to help at this point. So here are a couple case examples. Number one, lately you've had the feeling that Robert is upset with you. In the past, you've gotten along well with Robert, but recently he seems to be angry with you. You've tried to talk to him, but he just says that everything's okay and he walks away. Tonight, he's gotten into several explosive arguments with other residents. What could you do? Number one, how am I feeling? How's my client feeling? How's the environment contributing? What are my best course of actions? I could A, remind Robert of the consequences for his behaviors if they continue. B, let him blow off some steam. He can go to his room if he wants to. C, after he's calm, ask if you can talk about what's going on. Remember, until he's calm, trying to engage and have a thoughtful conversation isn't going to work because frequently a person's brain has been hijacked by their emotions. And D, when he's ready to talk, ask Robert to describe what just happened. Tell me more about that. So for sure, A probably is out. That's going to make someone worse. B might be good. Let them blow off some steam and then try to talk to them later. If you try to talk to someone before they're calm, it's not going to work. Case example number two, tonight, two clients were arguing in the TV room over what show to watch and whose choice is it to determine the show. What are you most likely going to do or not going to do? Number one, how am I feeling? How are my clients feeling? How's the environment contributing to the problem? Should I tell the residents to quiet down? Otherwise, you're going to pop off the TV for the night. Ask the two to sit down and meet with you. Redirect by asking one of the residents to help you. Hey, Johnny, I could really use some help. Can you help me get these garbage bags out to the trash? So that way you're changing the environment, you're managing the environment. B is tempting, but if one client is in a place to process and the other isn't, you're not going to get very far. And that client that was in a place to talk, they may turn around and re-escalate at that point. So probably A and B are out. C would be a good choice, or maybe you have some other thoughts of what you might do. Example number three, Sonia is a new resident. You don't have much information about Sonia. Tonight, while several families are watching a movie, you have an opportunity to get to know her a little bit, and she's having trouble with another resident. She's considered leaving the shelter and returning to her abuser. That doesn't sound like a safe option. What's your strategy? Number one, how am I feeling? How's my client feeling? What are they needing, wanting? How's the environment contributing? And then remember those three core values: respect, self-determination, meet the client at their level, and don't work harder than the client. So you could send Sonia to her room and tell her to take some time. Hey, go on up to your room. Ask Sonia specifically what the other resident's doing to cause the problem. Remind Sonia about behavioral expectations and the rules. C, ask Sonia to tell you how she feels, validating what her feelings are. Or D, offer to facilitate a discussion between Sonia and the resident. So clearly, probably A and B are going to make things worse. And if the other resident doesn't want to connect, then Sonia feels disempowered and devalued, like you didn't really do anything. So probably A, B, and D are out. So in retrospect, as we kind of tie this all together, I want to remind you what trauma does. It creates a level of adversity. It can impair our ability to think. It can make us feel helpless, learn helplessness. We can be disempowered. It can damage our relationships. It can lead to aggression, self-destruction. People acting out in shelter are usually acting out because it's a trauma reenactment, not because they're bad people. It can lead to disconnection, self-isolation. We can get re-victimized. We as a shelter could end up being seen as an abuser. Certainly, if we eject clients rather than working with them, we're going to reinforce their negative views of the world, and they're going to leave thinking that we're no better than their abuser. It's a tough spot to be in. There's unresolved griefs. And remember, multiple losses. And what does loss do? The threat of loss is equal to loss. Feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, demoralization, feeling like you're the problem, and the inability to see the future. It's really hard to imagine a future and have hope if you can't see the future. Thus, you truly believe you can't change. So what do we do? Number one, we're going to change the question. Number two, we're going to create a trauma-sensitive culture. And number three, we're going to give them a different experience. It's not what's wrong with them. They're not super manipulative. It's what's happened to them. We want to recognize symptoms as nothing more than survival skills. And we want to create a compassionate, genuine, empathetic, trauma-informed environment where everybody participates and trying to understand the client's lens, their client's view of the world. Hey, thank you so much for joining me in this journey. It's a blessing. Hopefully you gained a few takeaways. Number one, how are you feeling? Number two, how's your client feeling? What are they needing, wanting? Number three, how's the environment contributing to the situation? Respecting client self-determination, even when they make a poor choice. Understanding that we meet clients at their level of functioning, and there's no value in working harder than the client. We disempower them when we work harder. And remember, there's little t traumas, which include loss, big T traumas, and complex traumas. And all of that exposure to us, that's secondary trauma. We're all victims of secondary trauma exposure. Hey, thanks so much. I look forward to hearing from you soon.